Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. I am your man, Ant Walker, here for the Walk of Shame for UFC 237 and Bellator 221. And we got a special guest here, my man, fellow Backfist boy, fellow Sherdogger, James Lynch. How you doing, James?
I'm doing awesome, man. Thanks so much for having me on. What a crazy night of fights. This is one of the more bizarre nights in MMA on both events with Bellator and with the UFC. So I'm happy to, talk some shop here with you about all the madness.
Yeah, man, it was a lot of just really strange things that happened. But I guess since we are just finishing the strawweight title fight between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade. In case you're watching this post-fight show without watching the fight for some strange reason, Jessica Andrade is now the UFC strawweight champion by a knockout, by a slam in the second round. James, what are your immediate thoughts on this fight, man? This was kind of nuts.
This isn't something you see too often where, a fighter's in control of the majority of the fight and then, something crazy happens and they lose. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Jessica Andrade. She is the strawweight champion. No questions about that. Does her best Undertaker impression getting the win here. But, I mean, it's so tough. Like, what did we really learn tonight about this fight? Like, we learned that Rose used her range well, that she was, sort of picking apart Jessica. Jessica had her moments as well. She had a few shots here and there. But then she just, in the second round, just again, Rose is doing the same thing. Andrade gets a hold of her again. She did slam her in the first. Second round, she slams her, and it ends up, her neck kind of fell awkwardly, and she gets KO'd. Shades of Gerald Harris in some of his finishes as well in his career. I think what we've learned is just that this sport is so unpredictable, and that Andrade. I mean, there's so many things that I'm even just processing right now. Like, first off, we have a new champion. That's the most important thing. The strawweight division is finally moving forward because, Namajunas was out for so long. And now you've got, so many interesting possibilities. You've got the Tatiana Suarez fight with Nina Ansaroff. You've got Joanna Jędrzejczyk now, who now, potentially has a clear path to a title with Rose out of the picture temporarily. And you've also got Michelle Waterson. So there's just this win is just so huge for this division because I think had Rose won, your options are a little bit more limited. But now you've got Joanna right back in the mix.
Well, you know what? That kind of brings me to a couple questions that we've got in the queue right now. One from Cole Shelton, another member of the Sherdog staff, and then another question from a Sherdog staff member, Jason Burgos, who is the co-host of The Trenches with me on the Sherdog YouTube page. So they're asking about what's next. So Jason knows my dislike for a lot of immediate rematches. But this seems like a case you could make for an immediate rematch, even though this was a very definitive finish. Cole Shelton is asking about who we think should get the nod next with the Suarez and Ansaroff winner, as you mentioned, Michelle Waterson as well, and JJ coming back to reclaim her title. So where do you see this breaking down?
Well, I'm glad you talked about break because seriously, Rose's neck looked pretty bad. I know she did the post-fight interview. We'll have to see how healthy she is after this, in terms of her injury from this fight. If she's not too badly injured, then I'm with you. I mean, to me, there's two ways you do a rematch. It's a close fight, like a Jones-Gustafsson one, or it's this type of situation where you have a fighter who pretty much dominated the fight and, ends up losing. I'm not going to call it a fluke because clearly she picked her up, threw her down. I mean, it is what it is. Jessica Andrade clearly won, but it is one of those cases where I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch because, again, we didn't really learn a lot about Jessica Andrade in this fight. We learned more about how great Rose looked up until getting knocked out, and I'm not taking anything away from Andrade here. Like I said, she won the title, but, if Rose is ready to go, I think that's the fight you do, but I'm really intrigued with, not to take anything away from Nina Ansaroff, but Tatiana Suarez, to me, it sort of has that ick factor right now. And she's got a great story as well, overcoming, some health issues earlier in her career. I mean, that's an intriguing fight as well. I just think there's a lot of good options going forward here. I would not like to see Michelle Waterson get the next shot. I know ESPN's very big on her. They had her on the broadcast again tonight. They've done some really good profiles on her, but I just don't think the last win she had really warrants a title shot to me. Do Waterson and Joanna next. Figure that out. And then I say the winner of Ansaroff and Suarez, I think should get the next crack, assuming Rose is on the sidelines. If she's not, then do the Rose rematch.
As much as I like the Joanna and Michelle Waterson pairing, I really do like that. That's actually something that I didn't even think of previously, but I actually think that you could put Michelle Waterson in the next title shot just on scheduling. because if say Andrade is healthy after this fight, I don't think we have, other than her eye being bruised up, I don't think we have anything to indicate that she's injured seriously at all. She heals up pretty quick. Michelle Waterson looks pretty healthy, ready to go. So you could book them. You've got Nina Ansaroff and Tatiana Suarez in the queue right now. So that fight is definitely going to happen. And you can probably assume that Rose is going to be at least somewhat jacked up from this. At the very least, if her neck isn't injured. She did get knocked cold out. So just off of letting her brain heal wouldn't be the best idea to just throw her in right away. So I do think on that basis, you could put Michelle Waterson in on this, and it would make sense in that respect. And she is a big name. She's somebody who has an exciting style, and obviously the promotion really, really favors her.
Yeah, you bring up a great point in the scheduling, and that's something I did overlook here. I think that does make sense if you want to keep the division moving. And again, we've had this standstill. Like I said, Rose defended her title last April, against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the rematch, but then took a lot of time off. That was one of the things they talked about heading into this fight. Let's get this division moving. So yeah, if it's the sake, and the UFC might need a title fight coming up here soon. They're really booking some of these mega fights. We just got a glance at the schedule this evening. They need to fill up some holes, beef up some cards, so to speak. So you're right. This might actually make sense. If Andrade looked like she didn't take too much damage in this fight, if she's ready to go and Waterson doesn't have an opponent, yeah, I mean, from a keeping the division moving standpoint, 100% I'm with you.
All right, so let's briefly talk about the actual fight itself, just breaking down the action itself. I mean, Rose looked as good as she's ever looked. I mean, she looked like a complete mixed martial artist, and I know we throw the term around well-rounded fighter. We throw that term around a lot, but I mean, I think the way she performed in that first round and up until the knockout, really, that was about as well-rounded of a performance that you could ever think of. In the sport. I mean, she put on an absolute clinic in that first round. That second round, kind of the same thing. Her movement was on point. Her ability to evade shots, and Andrade was throwing everything with power and barely was able to touch Rose. And the shots that did land, she took them very well, fought her off in the clinch. I mean, there was a lot of good things that she did in there.
Yeah, the speed they talked about on the broadcast, I thought was very evident early on. Rose really getting her shots off using that jab, I think looked really good as well. Like Andrade didn't really have much of an answer. And like DC said in the broadcast, if you really want to get Rose, the way to get it is, the way to get her, I should say, is to just bite down on that mouthpiece, take some damage, but at least you're going to get in on the inside. Turns out she didn't have to do that, but still, it was an effective strategy in certain moments of the fight itself. But that's actually one of the reasons I picked Rose in this fight. And I thought that, again, the height and reach would be a bit of an advantage heading into it. It looked like she was certainly on her way to doing that. Yeah, from a technical standpoint, Rose looked very good. It's so funny. I got to throw this out here. So many people I saw on my timeline being like, Rose looks scared. This might be it for her. It's like, stuff like that is so irrelevant because like Rose had her best performance up until the KO slam, and people are talking about how she looks and all this stuff. It's like to me it's irrelevant. Once you get in there, if you can put it together like Rose did, I thought it was a great performance, like I said, up until the KO. But yeah, I think it just goes to show that once that cage door closes, certain fighters can bring it and other fighters can. And I think the key thing I think is just that Rose had a very complete performance up until getting finished.
Right. I mean, I must comment on that check hook. That check hook was insane. That's a technique that doesn't come over to mixed martial arts a whole lot. You see it a lot in boxing, but to see that so well executed in MMA just made me really, really, really happy. And then also on the technical aspect for Andrade, what led up to the finish, how Rose was going for that Kimura to prevent the slam takedowns, and she was able to turn that on its head and use it, and then turn it on its head, pun intended there. She used that against Rose to ultimately get what I think she intended to get it to the ground and do work there. But, just for her good fortune's sake, Rose landed on her head and therefore is knocked out. So great fight right there. And very curious as to what happens next in that division. So let's move on to the co-main event, Anderson Silva versus Jared Cannonier. Man, I hate to see a fight in like this.
Yeah,
it's just that simple. I mean, this is a fight that I wasn't exactly looking forward to anyway. When you see Anderson Silva being a legend that he is, he's 44 years old. His career is winding down. He's in his hometown, and you think this could be a send-off fight, maybe attach a story to it. Maybe somebody that evokes some sort of emotion, or there's some sort of backstory. There's something other than just your rank and file contender coming up to do work. And Jared Cannonier, no disrespect to him, is that rank and file contender that just came up and did work.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with this a little bit, only because, and I've seen a lot of other people mention this as well, it's kind of a boring fight. And I agree, it's not the most exciting thing ever. But realistically, at this point in Anderson Silva's career, he's not winning fights. He can't beat the top contenders. So at this point, middleweight unfortunately doesn't have sort of the riches of like really named fighters there. Like at this point, like as far as like, you know, fighters that we would recognize, like you're not going to do a trilogy fight with Weidman. I don't think that makes sense. You can't. Rockhold's moved up to 205. That might have been an interesting matchup. You're going to get these Jared Cannoniers and everyone else just because that's what's left over. And for Cannonier, I think the UFC really wanted to see what this guy's made of at middleweight. I mean, if you remember the Dave Branch fight, he actually didn't look great in the first round, came out in the second, finished him. You know, is this guy legit at middleweight? We still don't know because, again, Silva, you know, this fight ended by injury here. But he's 35 years old. I mean, we don't know what's going on. I think this was just sort of a fight to see where both guys fit in the division. It's not, you know, it's not the sexiest matchup in the world, but I think it makes sense from that standpoint. But like you said, you never want to see a fight end like this. Like, I mean, this is, you know, shades of Silva Weidman too, like I said on Twitter, you know, in terms of Anderson breaking his leg, you know, an injury stops this fight. You know, credit to Cannonier. He was, you know, he's a game opponent and certainly deserves the win here, but it's not the way you want it to end. And the other big thing here is this the end of Anderson Silva? It might be. I mean, I'm not a doctor clearly, but you know, how many more times can you come back from injuries like this at his age? You hope this isn't the end. You hope he gets one more fight or something, but you know, this might be it for the Spider.
Yeah, I'm very curious of what the doctors have to say whenever someone goes down on a strike like that. It's usually pretty bad. It's usually a blown knee. I think they mentioned that on the broadcast and brought back memories of Carlos Condit losing to Tyron Woodley. That same sort of thing where leg kicks, you know, start that leg injury. Man, I just felt so. I mean, first of all, let's give due credit to Jared Cannonier. He executed a very, very good game plan. He stayed in Silva's face. He kept him thinking. He kept pressuring him. He never let him get comfortable and set into a rhythm. And how strange is it that Silva, being the Muay Thai and Taekwondo specialist, someone who has made tons of highlight reels with his kicks, now he succumbs to the most basic of inside leg kicks. Well executed, powerful, but nothing that stands out about the technique that had any flair to it that you think would you know, potentially fool a vet like Anderson Silva. So I think that's a interesting contrast right there.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that it was the type of performance that just shows that Cannonier can be competitive in this division, but there's nothing about his performance that says like, oh, this is a guy that could really, you know, do something to Robert Whitaker or Israel Adesanya. Like, we don't know, right? So I think, you know, there's more work to be done at middleweight. I think there's a lot of good options in terms of opponents for Cannonier and him getting this win. And we got to remember, you know, he had to deal with American Airlines losing his luggage. I think it was American. And, you know, going into Brazil and getting booed. I mean, that is an experience itself that a fighter can, you know, put in their cap and, you know, just take as an experience going forward, because certain fighters handle that stuff differently, mainly the Brazilian fans. But I think, you know, it's for Cannonier, it's only going forward. And again, at 35, his window's pretty short here. So he's got to make something happen if he wants to make a run for the title.
Yeah, and if he has that short window and he's trying to make a run for the title, like, what does a win over Anderson Silva at this point do for you?
Well,
you know,
it got Israel Adesanya a title shot, so I mean, you never know, right? So I think here it's going to look good. I mean, someone suggested Jack Hermansson as a potential opponent next. I mean, I think Hermansson's ranked a little bit higher, but if you look at some of the options right now at middleweight, it might not be that bad of an idea just to keep these guys busy at this point. I mean, there's definitely, like I said, middleweight's a bit of a mess right now, just with, you know, the fact that they're going to do Whitaker and Adesanya later on, and then you've got Calvin Gastelum. Like, there's just a lot of options right now at middleweight, so they got to figure some things out there. But I think Cannonier, you know, even with this win, the way it ended, I think it still moved him forward in the division.
It definitely should move him forward. There's no question about that. But I have to say, that at least with the Israel Adesanya win over Anderson Silva, that was more of a special circumstance. That felt like a passing of the torch moment. There was a story attached. There was something greater than just a fight on the card. And that's what I think this was lacking. And not that Jared Cannonier doesn't deserve to be in the queue to move up to potentially get a title shot. Of course he does. And he's earned everything that he's gotten so far in the middleweight division. But just Anderson Silva's a legend. putting a legend in what could end up being his final fight in his hometown against a Jared Cannonier just seems like a waste of a potential big moment, in my opinion.
By the way, I don't know if you're looking at the chat here. Matt Wells talking some smacks. It's saying, why is it disappointing? It was perfectly placed strike. No different than Anderson getting KO'd with a head strike. I know. I just, when it comes to Anderson Silva in Brazil, I'm looking at the context here. Like, you would have liked it to have been like a competitive fight that was like back and forth. And I realize that Cannonier definitely, he did his job, so to speak. I mean, he got the win. But it's just, I think seeing Anderson injured like that is just kind of a bummer. That's sort of more of what I was getting at. But yeah, but Matt can talk a smack. It's fine.
Yeah, Matt jumps on the chat and talks the good smack every so often. So, what's up, Matt? All right, but let's talk about the end of that. Well, not the end of the fight itself, but the post fight, the incessant booing that really appeared to really get to Jared Cannonier. That was the most bizarre post fight scene that I can remember, probably since 229, where there was felony assaults going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, good for Cannonier. I liked his honesty. I mean, that's not easy to say. You don't like the fans in Brazil. I mean, obviously, you got to still get out of there. Hopefully, there's some good security. But no, I don't blame him. I mean, like, this was a situation where Cannonier did his job. He won the fight. Like, yeah, your hometown guy lost, but like, come on, show a little bit of respect here. But again, I mean, this would happen in if like George St. Pierre like injured his knee in Montreal or something, it would be this equivalent. I mean, to say that this is a Brazilian fan thing, I think is inaccurate. I think a lot of fans would do the same thing. But no, I mean, I like the honesty from Jared Cannonier. That's one of the reasons I like interviewing him. He's just very, kind of see what you see is what you get, and we need to see more of that with these fighters. I like the raw personality that you see, especially in a post-fight interview.
Yeah, that was definitely a case of less is more. That that in its strange way became, at least to me, I think that's going to be a memorable moment. That's something that I think will stay in our minds of the most awkward silence in a post-fight interview. So there's that. All right, so let's move on to the fight underneath that. Jose Aldo lost a decision to Alexander Volkanovski, 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. 30-27 on mine as well. Is that your scorecard, James, too?
Yeah, it is. Volkanovski clearly won this fight. He was on cruise control. I saw a lot of people saying Aldo didn't look himself. I mean, we got to give credit to Volkanovski. This is a guy who continues to build his resume. 20-1 overall now. In my opinion, the clear-cut contender for the next title shot. I see Colt Shelton has a question in the chat as to why Edgar's name is being brought up. Two reasons. Number one, Edgar, he did the UFC a favor when he was supposed to fight Holloway, and Ortega came in and then Ortega finished him. So I think he could use that as a chip. And his manager's Ali Abdelaziz. I mean, this is a guy who got Cody Garbrandt a rematch against TJ Dillashaw when he got knocked out in their fight. So I think that's one of the reasons that Edgar's still at play. But back to Volkanovski. Yeah, you would have liked to see him get a finish to really, put that exclamation point on saying, yeah, he could fight Holloway. And, I don't think this was the type of performance that makes us think he could beat Holloway, but still it was a solid win. Decision over a guy in Aldo. Aaron Bronstetter had a stat. I'd have to go look it up. But Aldo, it's his first 3-round loss in forever. I think you have to go back to WEC or whenever was the last time that he lost. Actually, no, I don't think he ever lost in WEC. But to me, it's been such a long time that Aldo's lost like this that I mean, a win is a win. Aldo was looking good in his last two fights leading up to this one. So Volkanovski's a clear-cut winner here. I thought it was a pretty good performance, not an amazing performance, but a good, I'll actually upgrade the good to great. I thought this was a great performance by Volkanovski.
Yeah, I agree with that. It may not have been a highlight reel finish. It may not have been the most aesthetically pleasing thing, but when you're talking about a legend like Jose Aldo, a guy who is very capable of giving you all sorts of hellish violence in a split second, any advantage that you take over him, anytime you win a round against him, you are to be patted on the back and complimented for doing a good job. And this is that simple. To win a fight against Jose Aldo in Brazil, big deal. Big deal. And on top of that, too, once again, just like Anderson Silva, known for his kicks, but he falls to the kick. Volkanovski going at Aldo with the leg kicks. And that's something that we used to see Aldo do to everyone else. And you just wonder, what happened to that Aldo? Is he a thing of the past? Was his game plan? Did it not involve much leg kicking? Did he not think that would be a factor? It just kind of struck me as unusual.
I wonder if maybe this is just like a really wild theory, but I think maybe the reason he hasn't done that is because that doesn't look as sexy as, say, like a knockout. You look at his last 2 wins, right? He knocks out Moicano, he knocks out Jeremy Stevens. I think the kicks are, it adds sort of more to it. But I think if you looked at like the old Jose Aldo in a couple of his fights anyways, I mean, he just, like when he fought Faber, for example, if you go way back then, I mean, he basically just beat up his legs for a bunch of rounds. But that's not a fight that people typically bring up because of the fact that it wasn't like a flashy KO finish. So I think Aldo, he really wants another crack at the featherweight title. So I think his mindset was, I've got to go for the knockout, not necessarily the kicks. But you're right, neglecting that part of his game, I think, cost him in this fight because he does have really good leg kicks. And it was Volkanovski really laying down the lumber here tonight. So I think that was something that, was a bit unexpected. But we haven't seen Jose Aldo throw leg kicks, and I don't know how many fights now. It's got to be at least 4 or 5 fights.
All right. So we got a question in the chat here from Tommaso Mark, I think.
Yeah, he's a viewer that comes on my podcast every once in a while. He's a good dude.
Cool. All right, what's up, Tommaso? He asks, should Max versus Volkanovski be the co-main in Australia, or could it main event its own pay-per-view?
I think you have to put that in Australia just because of Volkanovski and, sort of, I always forget, is he New Zealand or Australia? I always get that mixed up. I think he's,
I think New Zealand, but
I think he was, you know what? I think he trains in New Zealand, but I believe he was born in Australia. But either way, that's an interesting one because that clearly could headline itself. Anything with Holloway would headline a card. But then you've got the factor of, Volkanovski, like I said, is born in Australia, trains in New Zealand. So that's something where, could be interesting in terms of, just the audience he would bring in. I guess that's sort of what I'm thinking there. But, we'll see. It depends what chips the UFC has to play with. I mean, we just saw Nate Diaz get announced tonight completely out of the blue. So, I mean, the UFC certainly has to look. And I'm sure they're looking at the numbers from 236 as well and saying, like, look, we got to really beef things up here. So, I think it will depend on what the rest of the cards look like. And if they need to use this Holloway fight as something, then they might have it as a standalone thing. But I think just with Volkanovski being born in Australia, I think that's you would want to put him on the same card as Whitaker and Adesanya.
Yeah, I think that would be quite a good card and a way to make a big moment in the Oceanic region even better. To have the 2 potential champion fights favoring that region just sounds like something that they deserve, being such a loyal fan base and sticking so loyally to the product, despite the fact that they typically get some really trash cards. So that would be a nice way to pat them on the back and say thank you. All right, so let's see. We got a couple more questions here on the chat. Got one from the homie Oscar, who asks, if Anderson Silva fights again, who do you book him against at this point?
Sorry, could you who should get booked, you're saying?
Anderson Silva, if he fights again, who do we book him against?
A veteran, someone notable. That's the thing, like middleweight just really doesn't have anyone right now that's like you could sit there and say like that would be like an interesting fight. I don't even know. Like, has anyone kind of jump up to you right now? Like, maybe you do the Weidman fight just for the hell of it, or maybe do Jacare. I don't know. Like, Jacare might be interesting because he just lost, right? So,
I think with Jacare, that does sound like an interesting fight. But I think they're friends, or at least they were training partners, and they didn't want to fight each other at a particular point in time. I think Weidman, even though we haven't seen much of him, he's still a little bit too close to the top of that division. If you ask me, especially with him having his last win being over Kelvin Gastelum, who just challenged for the interim title, I think Weidman would be wasting himself by taking that fight. I would like to see him fight maybe a David Branch. That's a fight I've been calling for quite some time. I think it does have some relevance in that David Branch was a 2-division champion in World Series of Fighting. He's a guy who's been criminally slept on in middleweight, and it looks like his best days are behind him now. That might be a good litmus test for both of them to see where they stand. And also that fight could end up being contested at light heavyweight as well if they decided they didn't want to cut the weight. So I think that'll be a potential good option there. Let's see what else we got. Another one from Cole asking about Zabit versus Ortega rumblings. What do you think of that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of makes sense for both guys. Like Ortega, lost that title fight to Holloway. It was a pretty one-sided fight. And then you've got Zabit, who's, this everyone says is going to be the next champ. He's a lot of hype behind him. Had a pretty good win over Jeremy Stevens, not an amazing win, but a pretty solid performance. Let's see where he fits. I mean, some people would think this is a huge step up for Zabit, so to speak, going from Jeremy Stevens to Ortega. But at the same time, how good is this guy? Let's find out. Him and Ortega, and if Ortega gets the win, he's right back in the driver's seat. And if Zabit wins, then that's huge. That gets him right close. We'll have another contender. So I actually like the matchup here.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I'm really feeling that one. Ortega always performs well in Southern California too, so why not? Why not put him there? All right, so what else we got? We did have. You know what? I want to save some of the Nate versus Pettis talk for a little bit. Let's go into Bellator, because not a whole lot else on the UFC card we could talk about other than BJ Penn versus Clay Guida. I think that's the only one that deserves some discussion. I don't want to see BJ Penn fight again. I'm sorry. Like, he's a legend. I was a big fan of his. I don't want to see him fight again.
I think you and pretty much even all the biggest BJ Penn fans feel the same way. UFC record tonight, 7 straight losses. We'll probably never see that in the UFC ever again, just with the fact that the UFC has so much loyalty to BJ and everything that he's done. Like, I can't imagine a scenario where this would happen again. He had, I think he looked okay in the first round, but after that, it was kind of, sort of downhill from there. Is, what they talked about on the broadcast is cardio really sort of gave out. I think it's, it's kind of sad. I mean, just to think how dominant this guy was. I mean, I remember his win over Sean Shirk, it wasn't that long ago when he was at lightweight champ and all that. And it's just to see what it's become. It's this is the definition of, staying in the sport too late. You just got to hang him up, or at the very least, book him against CM Punk and get him a win. Because I don't know who he beats right now in the weight class.
Right. I mean, the experimenting with these different style matchups. I mean, Ryan Hall not being much of a striker, yet he submitted BJ Penn, who was known for his jiu-jitsu prowess back in the day, and then to have him against a Clay Guida who isn't much of a threat on the feet necessarily. BJ Penn also having great takedown defense, and Guida will be the one to try to take you down and bully you on the ground. Even with Clay Guida unable to use his old style of game, he still was able to get a win over BJ Penn, and that says a lot. And Clay Guida is definitely far beyond his best years as well. So I think it's time to just turn the light out on BJ Penn as an active UFC fighter.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's, I mean, the UFC has to do something here. And I think you hope he doesn't want to go. And if you're Scott Coker, you don't answer that phone. To me, it's like, let BJ do something in MMA where he's able to be an ambassador or whatever, figure something out. I mean, the guy comes from a lot of money. It's not like he's hard up for cash. You would hope that they just make something where he can just be involved in the sport, but no need to fight anymore. It's just the game's evolved over him. And we saw that on display tonight.
All right, so let's get a little bit of talk in here about Bellator 221. How much of this card did you manage to check out, James?
I tried to flip back and forth as much as I could. I saw pretty much most of the fights, nothing on the prelims, but I caught the Tywon Claxton win. I caught pretty much all the fights that I saw, including the main event. I actually was more intrigued, to be honest. I missed the first round of Aldo and Volkanovski to watch Pitbull and Chandler, and wow, I mean, we'll talk about that obviously, but amazing.
Yeah, I did not see it going that way. I mean, definitely knowing that Patricio Pitbull would probably have a speed advantage, considering that he was a smaller guy. He might be fresher because he's not cutting weight, so that could come into play there. But my initial thought was that, Chandler would be able to use his superior size, use his strength, use his wrestling skills, and just wear away on Patricio after a while, and then maybe get a late finish, if not a very clear-cut decision. Of course, we didn't even get there. Didn't even get close to that. That one shot landed, I think it was behind the ear that put him down. Pretty crazy. Wow, the champ talk continues. It's cross-promotional now. So we've got 2 double champions in Bellator to match the double champion craze that is taking over the UFC.
Well, let's not forget Ryan Bader's also a double champ in Bellator too, which we always forget about. But still, I mean, it's great to see Patricio, and also Patricio getting some revenge for his brother who lost to Chandler, I think twice actually. So this is going to be nice to sort of get some revenge there. But just. We should mention there was a bit of, people say it was controversial. The ref might have stepped in a little early. Look, Chandler didn't feel that way after the fight, so I don't know why a lot of people are getting upset with this. Initially, when I saw it, I was like, eh. And then when I saw the replay, I was like, yeah, he was out, or he wasn't out, but he wasn't defending himself. great win for Pitbull. He's a guy that, in my opinion, is criminally underrated when we talk about some of the great featherweights. Like, I think if this guy was in the UFC, he'd be doing quite well. And I think what helped was he spent his whole camp in Arizona training with Henry Cejudo. And, I think that really paid dividends for, training with a high-level wrestler like Henry to really, counteract Chandler. Whatever he did, it worked. And Chandler loses another kind of weird fight. I mean, this was a clear-cut win, but still, it's like, he had that fight with Primus not that long ago. So, I mean, it's just weird to think that Michael Chandler is no longer the Bellator champ at this point, because he was sort of the face of, Bellator, and now it's got to be Pitbull. Hopefully they put some more promotion into this guy.
Well, maybe when they put the promotion in, they'll help me tell the difference between one and the other, since they look exactly the same and have that same mustache. But I think Michael Chandler, man, he's an institution in Bellator. So it's definitely going to take some getting used to for him not to have the lightweight title. I wasn't the biggest fan of the stoppage in real time as well. It looked kind of strange to me, but I'm also on the replay. I felt a little bit better, but I just wasn't mad about it. He went out at some point. He wasn't defending himself. How many more shots does he need to take before we've got a clear-cut thing? Now, I do think if you ran that fight back, it would go a lot differently. I don't think
100%.
Yeah, I think I believe they mentioned this on the broadcast about it being very reminiscent of Junior Dos Santos knocking out Cain Velasquez in their first fight.
Yeah,
it was like the same sort of punch landed the same way. But of course, you saw what happened when they rematched each other 2 more times.
Well, that's the question. What do you do here? I mean, you have this really good grudge match, and it, Chandler was the champ. Mind you, he had just got his title back from Brent Primus. We don't need to talk about that fight, but I mean, is now the time to cash in on doing the rematch, or do you save that? You let Patricio fight someone else. Maybe he goes back down to 45. Actually, when I interviewed him, he mentioned about potentially going down to 35 and fighting the winner of Caldwell and Horiguchi.
Yeah, that just sounds nuts. Yeah, that sounds
you never
nuts.
know. I mean, this guy, like I said, he's very talented. So, I mean, we'll have to see. Bellator's got to figure this thing out, but I'm just trying to think at lightweight right now, like who really stands out as like a number one contender that would fight for the title next. Maybe it's not coming to mind right now. Maybe do the rematch between Henderson and Benson Henderson and Patricio, but I don't know. It's tough to say.
All right, I mean, after the Goga Plata submission that Brett Primus got last week or the week before it was, I mean, I don't see why not. That sounds like a good enough one. And then, of course, if Primus wins that, then you can set up a rubber match between him and Chandler. So there is like a road to go down, no matter who wins that fight. So I think that might be a better option. And Ben Henderson wouldn't be a bad one, but maybe Ben Henderson and Chandler should have their rematch now.
Yes. Was that fight? I think that was 2017. I'm trying to remember when that fight actually took place. I was trying to think if that's like too soon, but maybe now's the time you could do the trilogy matchup between Primus and Chandler. Finally settle it once and for all. But again, that fight didn't happen that long ago either. Yeah, the Henderson fight was 2016. Wow. Time really flies. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it might be time to do that rematch. It could happen.
Yeah, and I think if you do Chandler versus Primus again for the third time, you do that for the third fight, it has to be for the title.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Something that can if they both just don't happen to be able to get the belt, then fine. Rematch it however you can, but as long as they're in proximity of the title, they should be fighting each other for the title. In my opinion. All right. So Douglas Lima defeats Michael Venom Page with a pretty nasty uppercut as Page was getting up off of a leg kick. So, I mean, I guess the hype train stops on MVP, or should we be talking more about how great Douglas Lima is? It's about time this guy gets some respect.
Well, here's the weird thing about this fight. I don't think Lima looked great up until that knockout, and then he gets the knockout. So it's kind of like a weird thing in a way. And to be honest, I think the hype train, like I keep forgetting that Page won his last fight against Paul Daly. I realize it's a tournament, but that was such a bad fight. I mean, that could have gone either way, in my opinion. And I think the hype on Page sort of stalled after that fight a little bit as far as him being this wrecking machine. Lima gets the win, and another just like a great performance, getting a finish here. I think it's one of those things where Lima clearly, this is a big win for him. I mean, at the end of the day, people are going to look at the result. They're not going to look at the overall performance in the fight. The result is he gets a knockout win. He hands Michael Page's first loss. I mean, that's huge for him. This is a guy that I think could win the whole thing right now with Lima. Even though I wasn't that impressed with him in the early going of the fight, for him to get the finish, looks great. And yeah, I think he's right up there now. So we'll see what happens on the other side of the bracket. But I think Lima's sitting pretty good right now.
Right. From what we just saw of this tournament so far, he's my favorite to win it. If Douglas Lima, who has now secured his spot in the finals, if he fights either Neiman Gracie or Rory McDonald, especially the Rory McDonald that fought John Fitch last week or the week before, whatever it was, man, I've got to say Lima comes out ahead on that one. That just seems like it makes a lot of sense to me. Let's keep in mind too that Rory McDonald, when he beat Douglas Lima, he was only a hair away from losing that fight due to leg kicks. Super
narrow fight. It's fun. I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people talk about that fight like, oh, that was this and that, but that was a razor close fight. I mean, that could have gone either way.
Yeah, I don't see the Lima that fought tonight, even if that was, in your opinion, that wasn't the best that we've seen of Lima. That Lima, I think, destroys the Roy McDonald that we saw against John Fitch, especially if he's having his second thoughts about the nature of fighting itself as it relates to his faith and his family life. Definitely don't want to be looking across Douglas Lima if you're not willing to do violence.
No, I agree. Yeah, you can't. If Rory fights like he did against John Fitch, Rory will get finished. I have no doubt about that.
Right. All right. So AJ McKee taking on Pat Curran. He wins a pretty clear-cut decision. I think this fight confirms something that we felt for quite some time, and that's AJ McKee is very legit and he's to be taken seriously.
He is. You mentioned it not being a great fight. I think that's just by AJ McKee standards. It wasn't an amazing fight by any means, but we're just used to seeing AJ McKee being this highlight reel machine. Like, it's the first time he's gone the distance since the Lawrence fight. And even before that, like, he doesn't generally go the distance. He usually finishes his opponents in like highlight reel fashion. But I mean, he's up there now. And, we're just talking about Patricio Pitbull. If he goes down to featherweight, I mean, McKee's up there. Henry Corrales is up there. Like, featherweight's very interesting right now. And this is a big win for McKee. I had him, I picked him in this fight. I think a lot of people did just with the layoff with Curran and everything else. But, I mean, this is a win over a former champion that always looks good on the resume. At the end of the day, you got the win. That's the most important thing.
All right. So definitely looking forward to seeing what AJ McKee has next. And especially now that Aaron Pico is no longer his training partner. And they are top prospects in the same division. It's going to be interesting to see if their paths do collide. I suspect they will at some point in the distant future, I guess.
Yeah, it's if I interview AJ at some point soon, I would definitely ask that question, because at the time I did interview him, it sounded like that would only ever happen if it was for a title. But was there bad blood in them leaving? Like, Pico seems like a pretty nice guy. I think a camp switch might still keep the loyalty there as far as the two. But I mean, that's a fight I'd love to see at some point as well. So we'll see what happens. You never know. But a lot of good options at featherweight right now in Bellator.
All right, good stuff going there. So let's talk about Jake Hager versus TJ Jones. I mean, it happened. That's about all we could say about it. TJ Jones definitely enjoyed the moment. He was there. He came out to a fun song, and he sang, he danced, he had a great time, and then the inevitable happened.
Yeah, I mean, we knew what we were expecting when we got this. You saw the media workouts. I mean, props to Bellator, by the way, for the way they handled this, and I think the media handled this as well, is that TJ Jones got his 15 minutes of fame. I don't know if we'll ever hear about this guy after this fight this weekend, but he certainly was sort of this sort of pseudo-celebrity that they made. I saw CJ Tuttle, the PR guy, tweeting out something about the GOAT with Chael Sonnen. It was a photo of TJ Jones and Chael Sonnen. Like, I like that stuff. I thought that was good, but it is what it is. They got to build up Hager. I don't have an issue with it. Hager, they need to build him up. He doesn't, he has good, obviously, wrestling background, but you still have to build him up a little bit as far as, his career. They don't want to have another Aaron Pico situation against Zach Freeman or, Henry Corrales. So, it is what it is. I think Hager will probably get one more opponent like this going forward. And then they'll test the waters. Maybe you give him like a Javi Ayala or whoever, just to see sort of where he fits at this point. But we didn't really learn anything tonight other than Hager actually kind of pissed some people off. He sort of went a bit of a heel, as they call in the wrestling business.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what we'd expect. I mean, for all the chatter about this online and all the jokes that we can make, and I'm sure there's some fine memes out there that perfectly capture the moment. But this is kind of what you'd expect with a guy who came into this contest at 1-0. He's gonna fight a guy who's 1-0 or 0-1 or 0-0. Like, he's gonna fight someone who has pretty much no experience as well. So this makes sense. It just looked crazy when you see them standing next to each other. The clear difference in athleticism. So Jake Hager will, he'll put some butts in seats. He'll either make people happy or he'll piss them off if he continues to hold chokes too long. But I guess the level of competition stepped up because this time he didn't have to pass. He did have to pass the half guard in order to lock in the arm triangle. So there's that.
Yeah, so we're seeing bits and pieces in his game, going forward. And I talked to his coach Josh Rafferty, Ultimate Fighter alum. He's making good progress. He works very hard, and Jake still wrestles too. I think a lot of people forget that he does some stuff on the regional scene for wrestling. I believe for this camp he just focused primarily on the MMA stuff. But I know leading into his debut, he actually was doing some wrestling as well. So busy schedule for this guy. One thing I wanted to point out, and I don't know if this will ever come out, sort of through things, but I noticed that Hager mentioned Donald Trump tonight, and I follow Hager on Twitter, and I noticed he's very conservative, and I'm wondering if this will eventually become a thing, because as we know, if you're conservative, you're Republican, a lot of the media doesn't generally like that at all. So I'm curious if this is something with Hager tonight, getting some fans against him, some boos from what I was hearing from some of the reporters down there. If this Donald Trump thing could amplify that at all, we'll see what happens. That
was exactly my thoughts too, and I thought maybe I was putting on my tinfoil hat a little too tight, but I'm glad a much more level-headed person like yourself was thinking along the same lines, because I saw that tweet. I believe it was from Jose Youngs of MMA Fighting, where he tweeted that was being said backstage. And at my first, I was like, it just seems like an unnecessary place to throw that in there. I definitely think that was something that was contrived to generate some hype. So maybe he, could be genuinely conservative, could genuinely want Donald Trump to get reelected, whatever. But the spot that he said that, you're trying to get some attention. So
why not? I mean, why not look like again, like people hate Colby Covington, but people still talk about him when he's not, like, the guy hasn't fought in a year, and I've heard more about him than a lot of fighters on the roster. So I think it's one of those things that, like you said, could be a little strategic, and why not? I guess, politics always divides people, and it always gets people talking. So good for him.
Exactly. And you would expect the pro wrestler to have this sort of promotional tactic. That's just so fitting. So I wouldn't get too riled up about any Donald Trump statements that Jake Hager makes behind scenes at Bellator. So.
Yeah.
All right. So I mean, I don't really think we need to talk about anything else really on this card. I mean, Tywin Claxton had a very, very dominant win over James Bennett, and that's kind of it as far as the names that are worth paying attention to, at least at this stage, because of course Bellator loads their prelims up with a lot of beginners. But let's let me scroll down to some other questions on the chat here. Your homie Tommaso Mark has definitely left a few good ones for us. He asked, what was your personal fight of the night from both shows?
Oh, wow. So for Bellator, fight of the night, I would probably go. I mean, how do you, like, there were a lot of finishes here, right? So it's like, and I can't give it to McKee and Kern, unfortunately. I'd probably go Lima Page, just with the fact that, it was a little bit more entertaining than McKee Curran, and it ended with a finish. Like, you can't give it to Hager or Jones, and I didn't see the prelims, so I can't really judge on that. But I'll go Lima Page, because the main event didn't last long. And for the UFC 237 card, again, nothing's really standing out to me, to be honest. Like, I don't think Volkanovski and Aldo was like a fight of the night type performance. I'll probably go the main event, actually. I mean, it has to be the main event. What am I talking about?
Yeah, main event gets it for me for 237. Like, that was about as exciting as you can get for such a short burst, and the ups and downs, and that was pretty dramatic. So for Bellator, it's a deep dive on the prelims, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing these guys' names wrong, but Adil Benjelani versus Chris Lencioni was a hell of a scrap.
Yeah, I heard Lecchioni training at what is it? He trains with Chael Sonnen out at Gracie Barra, Portland. So he was on a bit of a losing streak, actually. I can't remember if he won his last fight, but he's a decent prospect. But this was a big win tonight because I think a lot of people were sort of counting him out after some of those losses. And he had tough opponents. Tywon Claxton and Daniel Carey was the fight that I think people thought he was going to win, and he lost. So this is a big win for him, getting back in the win column. 24 years old, now 5-2. That looks good, man. He's a guy they can build on.
Right. Those two had a hell of a scrap going back and forth. I was doing live scoring for Sherdog for the Bellator card. And I was so relieved that the fight ended when it did, because I genuinely did not know who I was scoring that round for. So that was about as action packed as you can expect 4 minutes and 55 seconds to be. So Lencioni winning that fight by a triangle choke with 5 seconds left remaining in the first round. So, all right, let's see what other ones do we have over here. All right, so yeah, so let's dive into this Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis fight. This one looks like it's scheduled for UFC 241 in Anaheim, California. So fortunately, I'll be in attendance, as that is.
I'll see you there. I'll be going to that one too.
Yeah, local for me, so I'll be there, man. I'm trying not to get too excited about this.
You can't. Anytime a Diaz brother's attached to anything, you can only get excited once that cage door closes, and even then. You know, we could have some crazy stuff. Maybe something falls from the ceiling. I don't know. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'd love to get excited about this until Nate Diaz himself tweets it out saying, I can't wait to beat up Pettis. Then we know it's official. Even Dana White saying it's official. Remember Nick Diaz? It was a done deal with, what was it, a 235?
Masvidal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Like until we actually see Nate Diaz say that this fight's happening and there's no issues. I guess the Poirier fight was technically on, but still, I'd like to see some concrete evidence there. But yeah, if that happens, oh man, I can't wait.
Right. That's such a ridiculous matchup. And I think this was a fight that was talked about some years ago between Pettis and Nate Diaz, if I'm remembering that correctly. But like you said, I don't want to jump down this being absolutely official just yet. I mean, we've seen this a whole lot lately where the UFC will announce a fight before both bout agreements are signed. And they've done this to, I guess, jumping ahead out of anticipation, or as a negotiation tactic to pressure someone to sign their bout agreement and whatnot to get the fans against them and what. But I'm waiting for that Nate Diaz 209 tweet. That's what I'm waiting for, and then we'll know this is real, or if it's not, or if this is just a negotiation ploy.
But let's assume it is. I mean, let's just pretend we're living in a fantasy world where everything works out. There's no injuries, anything like that. I mean, what a boost it is to that card. Like, that main event's awesome. That's a rematch I'm very interested in, just with the success that Miocic had heading into the first fight, and then him getting knocked out, which we haven't seen since Struve. The Struve loss, I should say. I mean, what a boost that is to that card. Like, that was a good enough card to start with the headliner, but then you add that as the co-main event. Like, holy, I'm assuming that's a co-main event, but that's just an incredible fight. And at welterweight, that adds so much different too. Like, is Diaz going to be better as a welterweight? Is he going to be worse? Like, Pettis looked good as a welterweight. I mean, there's so many cool factors about this fight.
Yeah, this should be a very, very interesting one. And then with two names that big who have experience at welterweight and are big enough names to start affecting the title picture there just by their presence, but also guys who are career lightweights. And a fight between them at welterweight will probably have implications on what happens in the 155-pound title picture as well. So very interesting fight from all angles. And without even diving into the X and O's, which I can't wait to dive into with that fight, that's if it happens. Let's not tempt the MMA gods. Just please happen.
One thing we got to mention about Nate Diaz, though, the fact that he does, looks like he has this fight booked. Again, we have to walk on eggshells when we're talking about this. I mean, what does this mean for Conor McGregor? Because I think that's the fight they should have done, is the trilogy fight, because Conor needs a fight that he can be competitive in, that he can win. I saw Luke Thomas throw Gaethje and McGregor. Love that fight. I don't know if that's a fight McGregor wins. I mean, we don't know. I mean, it's tough to say. I think with Diaz, at least there's the layoff. There's things working against him where this could be a fight that Conor could potentially win. I think you have to be careful about who you book Conor against next, because if he loses again, the Conor McGregor business isn't going to look good with back-to-back losses. So they got to be careful. They don't want another situation like they had with Ronda Rousey, where they could have literally given Ronda any, and I talk about this, people have very short memories. Like, you could have given Ronda Rousey any other women's bantamweight on the roster other than Amanda Nunes, and she probably would have won, and who knows where her career would have gone. But they gave her Nunes, which was a nightmare matchup. She fell in love with her striking. She gets knocked out. So it's like, they got to be careful about this. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, you can't book a Ronda Rousey in that situation against an Amanda Nunes when you have a Raquel Pennington there. Like that's sort of what has to be avoided here with McGregor. I've heard stuff about potentially Gaethje, and that's kind of what it looks like it could be.
Yeah.
Because who else is left, at least in that tier? I mean, I think if we start digging into or Edson Barboza's or the James Vicks, like guys who are just coming up off of bad losses, I think that might just be too low for McGregor to want to take, even though those will probably be better matchups for him. So the Gaethje one is interesting to me. I would somebody suggesting Conor versus Lando Venata. Yeah, that's not happening. That sounds fun. But I'm really thinking that Conor McGregor could possibly. I mean, you think they can make that in time for 240, because that's the one that stands out. They don't have anything for. They don't have a location. They don't have.
Well, they're saying Edmonton's the front runner, which is interesting because that's literally like an hour plane ride from where I live here in Vancouver, and that's an interesting spot. First off, and two, like, is McGregor going to want to fight in Edmonton? Like, that just seems so weird. That's why I think they haven't announced the date yet, because I think if McGregor's in, you do that fight in New York or wherever. I mean, I think it said New York or Edmonton. Actually, can Conor fight in New York? I don't know the legal stuff with that, but I'm wondering if that precludes him from fighting there because of his legal trouble. I don't know. But anyways, regardless, is that if you have Conor McGregor fighting in Canada just seems so bizarre. And I'd love to see Conor McGregor fight in Canada. I think he's too big of a star at this point that you would need to put him in either Vegas or New York.
Right, you got to put Conor McGregor in a big market, and whether or not he's technically eliminated from competing in New York, I think that's something that just doesn't matter. Because you also think, like, Conor McGregor had the press conference in New York leading up to 229, so it's not like legally he can't enter the state or enter the city of New York anymore. And of course, what athletic commission is going to turn down that money? That's just
great point. Yeah,
it's just not going to happen. So, Conor, when we look at the economic report that was released surrounding 229, and it was an estimated, I believe, like $80 million that was brought into Vegas during that fight week. Yeah, not a whole lot of places are going to say no to that.
And, there is some talk, too, that the reason they haven't officially announced Khabib versus Poirier next is there's some rumblings it might be him and Conor doing the rematch, even though I think a lot of fans don't want to see that just with the way the first fight went. But money-wise, that's a huge fight, right?
Yeah, it's a huge fight, but like you said, if we're talking about preserving Conor McGregor's star power, that's just the worst possible decision you can make, because yes, you have a big fight, but you're sacrificing this big pot of money right now for future big pots of money down the road.
I agree. However, I'm going to look at this from like a really weird conspiracy theory like standpoint. Maybe the UFC says this. They say, look, Conor's got all this stuff happening outside the cage legally. We don't need to go into that. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe there's a chance that, he's kind of a loose cannon. They don't know what to do with him. You just cash in on this now because you never know what the future holds. Maybe they decide to do that. Personally, I don't want to see the rematch. We saw what happened in the first fight. I don't think Conor's going to all of a sudden learn takedown defense and, submission defense and things like that in the span of his last fight. But you never know. The UFC's made dumb moves like that before, where they go for the money instead of going for what's, best long-term.
I mean, we can look at what happened with Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw.
Exactly. Yeah.
As a good example of that. So, all right. So we got another one here. How can Dustin win an interim title and not get a title unification bout? It has to be Poirier.
Politics, unfortunately. I mean, I agree. Poirier is the number one contender. He should fight Khabib. Everyone wants to see that fight. It's interesting. It's fresh. There's I could give you a million reasons why that makes sense, but there's politics. This is an entertainment sport along with a merit sport. And that always blurs the lines. I mean, that's why Dan Henderson got to fight Michael Bisping for a second time instead of someone like Yoel Romero or Jacare Souza. Go back and look at that. There were plenty of more deserving contenders than Henderson, but Bisping was a champ, has some pull, he's a broadcaster, all that stuff. He thought he could beat Henderson, and there's an intrigue factor of Henderson potentially being able to knock him out. He nearly did in that second fight, but we've seen situations before where entertainment triumphs merit, and I'm saying that could happen here. It may not end up happening. I hope it doesn't happen, but it could happen.
Right. So I'm definitely hoping that they just finally make good on an interim title belt, and the interim champion fight the real champion, and just let it all make sense. I mean, the money fights are fun, the super fights are fun, but let's get back to work, fellas.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
I'm with you there. Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Let me scan and see if we got anything else of note, because otherwise we probably will wrap it up. Oh yeah, worst losing streak: Jake Ellenberger or BJ? Definitely BJ. It's a longer
BJ,
losing
we got to go
streak.
with the numbers here. Yeah, the numbers are way worse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because also Ellenberger was never a UFC champion. Like BJ, when we talk about BJ, even like 5 years, like after the last time he won, right? Which, by the way, Sean Sheehan had a stat. Holloway had made his UFC debut 2 months after BJ had his last win, which is crazy to think. Like BJ was like talked about as one of the pound for pound greats. Like back in the day, before Conor, before all these other people, it was BJ, it was George St. Pierre, it was all these people. Like the 2019 BJ Penn, no one could have predicted this. Like, it's crazy.
No, absolutely not. I think when you remember when Anderson Silva said that BJ Penn is the greatest fighter of all time.
Yes. Yeah.
This is not what he was talking about.
This was not in the cards. Yeah, when he was talking about him losing to Clay Guida or Ryan Hall or and the other guys.
Outstruck by Dennis Seaver, like that's not.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, that's not what we had in mind there. All right, so we got one from Matt Wells. It says, "I feel Lima MVP fight was like Cannonier and Silva. One patient fighter landed the perfect strike when the opportunity presented itself."
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that as well. I just think that I don't know, just the way Silva holding his knee and all that, it just seems a little bit different. But I get what Matt. I agree with Matt in terms of the strategy on the person who won the fight. But I think the Cannonier example is just a little bit more bizarre, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was kind of just a weird set of circumstances. Although what happened was very legitimate, and Cannonier deserves all the credit in the world for a true finish. Excuse me. Now, as far as Lima MVP, one thing that I found kind of strange about this fight, I mean, of course, Lima got a very impressive stoppage, but MVP didn't look bad in this fight. I mean, let's keep in mind the stoppage was set up initially by Lima getting caught with a pretty nasty right hand, I believe it was, sent him stumbling back a little bit. He rushed in, and then Lima started the finishing sequence. And then in that first round, Lima was getting outstruck, and when he did get MVP down, he wasn't really able to do a whole lot with it. MVP was able to stall him on the ground, and we know Lima is very, very good on the ground. So that showed something. I think we can at least say that MVP is not quite championship caliber in Bellator just yet. But there's something there. There's still some promise. I still think you can pair him up with some fighters, and you might turn up with something. I wouldn't mind to see him fight Lorenz Larkin. That I think would be a good style matchup. That could be something that could be pretty exciting.
That's what I was thinking as well. Again, I think both guys are kind of like Larkin lost to Daly, right? And so I guess Page technically beat Daly. Like there's some interesting stuff there as far as the matchup goes. But that was the fight I was thinking too.
Yeah. All right. So what's more likely to happen, Conor versus Khabib 2 or Andrade versus Joanna 2?
That's a good question. I mean, Joanna should not fight for she's coming off a loss. I know it was in a different weight class, but come on. Like, she lost to Valentina. She should get one more fight at Strawweight to get back in there, I think. I think it's more likely that Conor and Khabib happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. And especially with the money that we were just talking about, that money sounds good. I mean, of course, in this era of the UFC where they're getting a lot of guaranteed money and pay-per-view isn't the huge cash cow as far as trying to get the big name on the card to get people to buy, like it was, as we see Brock Lesnar deciding to pass up on his title fight against Daniel Cormier. That's going to be stupid money. And the UFC will probably have a very difficult time saying no matter how much is guaranteed already. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Let's see. Could the Max that showed up versus Dustin beat the Conor that showed up versus Khabib?
Let me read that again. No, I'm trying to find it here. Could the Max that showed up versus Dustin beat the Conor that showed up versus Khabib? Yes, because that was still a close fight.
Yeah.
The Max and Dustin fight. Like Dustin clearly won, but I don't think it was like, I don't know. I didn't come away from that being like, man, Max, that was just like terrible performance. He was in there. He had his moments, but it wasn't clearly Dustin had him from the get-go. I think Max just from the first round on, just, he wasn't able to keep up or anything like that. And for Conor, I don't think there was ever a moment in the fight where it was like, he even got dropped in that fight too. So it's, to me, the Conor performance was a lot worse.
I agree with that. I mean, Conor had I think it was the third round where he arguably won. And other than that, but you could genuinely, and I disagree, but I saw genuine cases from people who do know what they're talking about that Holloway could have won a decision against Poirier, that it was certainly a close fight, but I ain't swaying that way, but it was a very close fight. Yeah. There were definitely some swing rounds, and Max looked a lot better than Conor did against Khabib. So yeah, that's pretty simple one there. Josh Emmett versus Frankie Edgar, maybe.
I don't think Edgar is going to take a fight against Josh Emmett at this point. I think unless like it's completely off the table that he's not fighting Max, like I guess Moicano's now fighting Korean Zombie, and you've got Zabit and Ortega. I guess you're running out of options at this point. Maybe they would go that route. I just think for Edgar at this point, I'm sure he only wants like big fights. And like I said, I feel like he probably thinks the UFC owes him because he took the Ortega fight.
Right. If I'm Frankie Edgar, and especially knowing his management, like they're not just going to settle for a Josh Emmett fight. That just doesn't sound anything in line with what we know of how his clients get treated. That's Frankie Edgar's going for a big fight, and if he jumps in front of Volkanovski to fight Max Holloway, would not be shocked at all. I think especially if that fight is, if you can't make Max versus Volkanovski in the Oceanic region, makes a lot of sense to give Edgar the shot against Holloway, and you can throw that anywhere in the U.S.
Well, it's too bad too. You know what fight actually would have made a little bit of sense is if they did Edgar and Zabit, but obviously they trained together, so that would never happen. But imagine if they didn't, that kind of would have made sense at this point, because Zabit is a guy that needs to step up, and Edgar's a guy that clearly wants to show that he's on top. If they had to do Volkanovski, because Edgar's not going to wait for the winner of Volkanovski and Holloway, I wouldn't think. That's a long time off for a guy who's in his mid-30s. So, yeah, that would have been interesting. But yeah, I think we'll see what happens. Again, we've seen times where the UFC, you think they go one way and they go the other. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. All right, James. So I think we'll wrap it up for the evening. It's just a strange night. A lot of freak occurrences. A lot of legends got put out to pasture today as well. So, but anyway, James, tell the people where they can find you. Tell everybody what you have coming up on the 30 or 70 outlets that you work for.
Well, actually, it's going to be easier. So Monday on the 13th, I actually start my new job at The Score. So I'm going to, so everything will just be at The Score. I'll have details on all that. Also talk about kind of the future of my YouTube channel and all that stuff. But check out The Score app. Well, I got you guys here. It's the best sports app in North America, hands down. I had it even before I took this job. I can't say enough good things about it. But yeah, just a lot of what you see me doing now, I'll be doing just exclusively for The Score. And I suggest you go check out Ant Walker's work, because I know you're going to be doing some more stuff at SureDog now. So check that out. But follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. You'll find out everything there. That makes sense. Monday, we're getting the ground running. Monday the 13th. I can't wait.
Definitely looking forward to your next move. So in case, because I'm always, we're friends, and I'm just and I've always admired your work. So yeah, happy for you, man. Nobody works harder than you in this industry. You deserve every good thing coming to you, brother.
Well, I appreciate it. And I think what's cool is that, we talked about this actually, I think at UFC 229, a lot of us are doing there's a group of people who are doing really good work in this industry. We all support each other. There's no egos, anything like that. I think those are the people you're going to see really running this thing media wise in the future. And I think, there's certainly, for a lot of our friends that we all know, I mean, there's a lot of big opportunities coming there. Matt in the chat, Cole Shelton, there's all these people doing really good stuff. I mean, if you're producing good stuff will come back. So I'm just one of the beneficiaries right now, but I know there's big things coming ahead for you as well with these opportunities and everything. So I'm excited, man. The future, it's never been better to be in the media.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate that. All right, so you guys know where to find me at Ant Walker MMA on Twitter. That's also my Instagram. I actually started posting things on Instagram, so check it out sometimes. But yeah, definitely follow my hot takes and sarcasm on Twitter as well. So what I have coming up for SureDog.com, I have the Good, Bad, and the Ugly, the weekly post-fight column that's going to be evaluating Bellator 221 and UFC 237 as well. I've got The Trenches, the live chat with myself and Jason Burgos on the SureDog YouTube page. That's going to be Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific time. And on a personal note, too, I definitely want to give a heartwarm thank you to everyone who reached out to me on Twitter, all the DMs and messages on Instagram and whatnot, wishing me condolences on my grandfather passing. So I will have to obviously take a little hiatus for a week or so to go back home and help bury my granddad. But thank you, everybody, for expressing your love. It means a lot to me. So you know what to do. You got to stay beautiful. You got to stay positive. And no matter what, no matter how hard you get slammed on your head, you must stay sexy. I will see you when I see you. Peace.